the Igbo spoken in Onitsha is not the same as the one they brought down from other parts of Igbo land. But over time, the intermeshing of the various dialects have become fixtures in the language.
But sir, how should history view someone like Lord Lugard in terms of the role he played?
The role that Lord Lugard played is very close to the role that I said the Kaladiran played. An adventurer who simply moves into a town and then fiddles with the politics of the area. And then he organizes a group in the town and drives a wedge between the priest rulers and the rest of the people. The people do not like what has happened, so they fight. And the fighting drives one part of the population east-west and another part of the population westwards, right into what we know today as the Republic of Benin, where movements from central Yoruba land to the outskirts. The various groups that the French were going to mobilize and that Lugard brought together under they had this race to Niki. The French and the English, led by Lugard, were trying to determine who would get to the leaders of the Bariba and other countries on the western side of the Niger before the other. Lugard happened to have got there and signed the agreement. Just for signing an agreement, a whole body of human beings were moved from what should have been a French side to the English side. It was a struggle, just a struggle for land. More interesting, however, is that they were under the command of European powers with a lot of firepower and energy to dispense. Once it became a case of their own countries being involved, they managed to take over other people. And depending on which European took over your area, you were already being eroded into a country of its own. Now, when the English conquered Habeland was already being governed by the Fulani. So it was the Fulani they really had to conquer. And once they conquered the Fulani, they used the large population they had to start conquering other people. Many people in the Middle Belt resisted. They took over very many parts of central and northern Nigeria in the manner in which today, in 2020, some people wish to take over all of Nigeria. First, they create anarchies in as many places as possible, disarrange systems of governance, move people of one language group to another, and alter the relationship of governor and the governed in as many places as they can. Since they were not particularly interested in nationality, wherever they conquered, they literally attempted to impose a language of their own. They were not imposing Fulbe, Fufude, no. They discovered that Hausa was a quicker means of reaching out to very many of the nationalities than any language they had, and they were lucky there was Islam, so that even those who did not speak the same language would worship in the same mosque. Now, once you started creating that modality, you were bound to create a relationship between different language groups, different religious groups, and in a manner that allowed one king to speak across diversities. What the English did was simply to take over the inheritance of the Fulani. Where Fulani power, where Hausa power, Hausa language power could not take the Fulani, British military support took them there. And the places where British military support could not reach had to be taken over by whatever means the British could.
Are you accusing them of bias?
You mean
The British?
the British? The British were just land grabbers and people who wanted to make money from other people. They were not interested in you unless insofar as they believed that your ethnic group would advance their interests more. They believed that in terms of, the Fulani were a very strong slave raiding group. And they had, as long distance travelers, they had an intelligence, they had an intelligence surround that made it possible for them to know what was happening in many distant places. They did not have a land fever like the one they now have. So they could get information from as far away as what we now call Burkina Faso. And as their cattle moved westwards, which is how some groups from what is now Nigeria traveled eastwards to as far as the Sudan and even Somalia. They were creating a fusion, a union that just needed a crafty state builder to put together. So many of us were related in language, in culture, in arts, and therefore the distancing from one and another that has come came likely, one, due to slavery. People who did not want to be enslaved banded together with other groups in order to defend a common territory. These began to create the basis for nation building. There are those who till today remember, have a memory either through their grandfathers or not, who have a memory of how they moved from one part of West Africa to the other and established themselves. The lucky ones were those who had created territories and kingdoms with a head who can negotiate with other heads. But if, like the Fulani, you did not have land to bargain over, it meant that you either had to plan a coup, as happened in Yoruba land, plan a coup against the existing heads. Why did I call it Yoruba land? That's happened in Ibomoko. Because Ife grew out of a bringing together of several people, and they were governed by one state builder who knew how to literally put them under one religious code, which created a code of governance. If you have that, all you need to do is to ensure that you have enough security to defend yourself. Now, A historian like Bala Osman says that if you therefore want to know about how countries were built, you just need to look at their military prowess and their ownership of territory. But the truth is that those things do not, those two alone do not build countries. To hold territories together and to use military power to hold a people together requires language, requires a sense of history, a sense of where we have been coming from and how we have been going, or where we are going. So that it is not enough to say we became a nation because we own this territory and we have guns or bow and arrow to protect ourselves. That is precisely why all those who have striven to build nations, nationalities, tribes and clans have always struggled to bring people of the same language, people of the same sense of history together. Now, it is when you are able to bring that language and sense of history and culture together with control of territory and arms that you can properly talk of being a nation.
But let me quickly bring in Ao's favorite phrase that Nigeria is not, it's just a mere
geographical expression.
Why did he say that? Is it in line with what
the truth is that when the British came, if you drew a line around all the areas that they conquered,
okay,
they were made up of people who were never governed by the same principle. People who spoke different languages, because even if I say that the Yoruba, the Igbo, and the Fulani belong to the same language family, remember, I am very careful. I say they belong to the same language family, not that they spoke the same language. And because their languages resemble, their child rearing habits resembled, and their ways of either greeting or their food culture were related, they shared enough for them to call themselves, over time, to call themselves one people. But when a new conqueror enters your geographical economy, the new conqueror reconfigures whatever existed before. What the Fulanis did when they came was to reconfigure as much of Hausa land as possible with a new language, which was not even their own, new child rearing habits, new occupations, because those who were coming from grassland were bringing the occupations that were not of the forest. And in trying to impose their hegemony over them, they were bringing together people who were of such divergent forms of life. All those people had never been governed together. In fact, to use the term that Ngui Wachongo has made popular, the language of one of them could not sing well in the language of another. And therefore, there was need for a reconfiguration of relationships. When Awolowo emphasizes the fact that Nigeria was a mere geographical expression, he was copying a position that was very famous in Europe at that time, when the Germans were overlooking the whole of Europe as a place to be hegemonized over. properly speaking, because we were not governed by the same codes, we were not one people. Even the Edo, who were of one language, were not necessarily governed in the same way, because Benin City exercised suzerainty over all the area we now call Edo. It is actually one of the few truly national ethnic group, in the sense that once they had a king in Benin who for centuries had control over their towns and villages. All that remained was for them to expand. The Edo people never colonized others. They entered an area to govern it. The Edo did not always do that. They allowed the people to govern themselves and pay tribute to Benin City. And it is precisely because of the difference in attitude towards colonization that you find today there are difficulties in determining how to remain one people. The difficulty that the British found, they worsened by taking one group which they considered strong enough to help them govern others. The British worked very hard. They pummeled the Fulani, killed their emirs, destroyed whatever they could destroy of the Fulani in order to make them obey the wishes of the British. Indirect rule was largely a means of ensuring that the British would do the bidding of the Anglo-Fulani,
the British.
The British.
Okay.
That when they talked about the indirect rule system, indirect rule system was a simple one of letting your own kings rule you in our interests. But in many places, they exercised direct rulership where they could do it. If they had a weak traditional ruler, they just turned him into a stool pigeon and used him. If the king was too strong because he had either military power or religious respect, as the Oba of Benin had, you had to conquer them completely. But you see, the Edo never went by that rule. The Edo preferred people who paid tribute. The Yoruba used a very different method. It was a cultural, very assimilative method, because if you worship the same gods, and you attend the same cultural festivals, you are gradually becoming one people. And that kind of position you could regard as almost close to the French pattern, the French assimilation. If you speak the same languages, you attend the same festival, and you pay tribute to the same overlords, you are almost one. The Edo took an area, but allowed them to govern themselves. Now, what we are experiencing in Nigeria today is that when the British came, they did not apply the rules that an imperialist would apply if what he wants to do is to become part of the people he will govern. The Fulani distanced themselves from the Hausa they were going to govern by making sure the Fulani code was observed. and it is a code. If it is a code that is you will find on many as insignia on the body of every Fulani. They are a people on the move, scattering around the world. They needed a means of recognizing themselves. Other ethnic nationalities in Nigeria started acquiring that during the slave centuries. Many Yoruba had to start having tribal marks because of that. The Fulani also had, and therefore you knew that we were dealing with a different people when you captured them. The other man who may no longer speak the same language would know by those marks that they are coming from the same source. Some, in order to differentiate those who were originals from those who were coming after, they simply added a mark. They simply added a small mark to show that these ones came from, shall we say, east of the area, and the other one came from the west. It is important to look at Nigeria from these angles and to realize to a very large extent, as Bala Usman actually argued, that there's no ethnic nationality in Nigeria that is completely of one blood. None. Even the Fulani who claim that they are not. Now, but when you have mixed with so many other groups, usually it is your language and the king you worship who determine how you identify yourself. Across Nigeria, that is precisely why about 526 or 529 groups can sequester themselves and lay claim to a common cultural tradition or whatever.